Okay.
All right, folks, welcome to our second day of Self Reliance Voices Lessons from Legends, where we are revisiting sessions from Self Reliance's past and some of our great speakers. It was really hard to choose only 5 sessions to see. We had a roaring debate in the background as we chose who to add to this. And today I'm delighted to have Eric Johnson, who is known as Porterhouse from Porterhouse and Teal. If you haven't checked out their YouTube channel, definitely head over to Porterhouse and Teal and give him a follow. He has a pretty cool series on finding an area on your land where you think there might be water and developing a spring. And he did that in a fairly arid environment where he lives in California. So it's going to be a great session today. And we're transitioning from community, right? Developing your community to developing the community of bacteria in your soil through backyard soil building. And we went here because the foundation of your ability to grow vegetables at home starts with the soil. When you want to grow awesome tomatoes, awesome peppers, a lettuce patch, whatever you're thinking of growing, the first thing you need to grow is soil. And there are a lot of conflicting pieces of information out there about what to do. There are really expensive ways to get your gardens ready, less expensive ways to get your gardens ready. But a healthy soil is a healthy network of organisms. And that is much like a healthy Self Reliance Festival community. It's a network of organisms all over the country. I wanted to say this, if you haven't checked it out yet, go to selfreliancefestival.com, and on the top menu it says info, and on the drop down it says map. And there is a map of anybody who voluntarily decided they wanted to add themselves to the map, and you'll see people all over the country who are willing to say, I'm in this area, hey, hit me up via email or whatever, and we can maybe get together. And that is how different communities are sort of finding each other. That's one of the many ways. So but today we're going to talk about soil things, and in keeping with the theme, Porterhouse and Teal make this soap with coffee, and it smells really good. And I happen to have a bar here, so today's giveaway at the end of the episode, we'll take a random person from the live stream, and this is your giveaway. You need to pick it up in person at Self Reliance Festival, either in October or in April, and we'll finish that. But I wanted to show this to you. This is inspired by hollow roast, by the way. There's actual hollow roast beans in this, and it smells so great. The thing I like about this soap in particular, I've seen a lot of coffee soaps, is that they ground the coffee finely enough that you don't end up with a bunch of coffee grounds in the bottom of your bathtub when you use it. So this one's really well made, and we will share the link with you. Have you already shared the link, Rebecca?
I just did it.
Yeah, so the link is, if you want to buy some, they're $5 a bar on their website. She threw that link in there. So, speaking of which, if this is your first time on Zoom and you haven't learned how to use the controls, if you hover over the window with your mouse, there'll be some icons that show up. One of them says chat, and there is already a lively discussion going on in the chat area, I see, including the link to the soap. So you can just write something in the chat there if you want to interact with people. And midway through today, we'll have some polling questions for you to answer. But let's start out today by, why don't you put in the chat, what is your favorite book? What is your favorite book? Write that in the. Yesterday we said where we were from. So today we'll say, what is your favorite book?
That is a good question. Nicole, what's your favorite book?
One of my favorite books, you're not gonna be expecting this. Wuthering Heights.
Okay.
So if I had to have a fiction book and I could only have one fiction book, it would be Wuthering Heights, because every time I read it, something else strikes me in the plot theme. But that's a weird one because I'm a nerd. But my other favorite book is The Encyclopedia of Country Living by Carla Emery, which
That
is
is
a book
fantastic.
every homesteader should have, right?
Yes.
So we've got the book, The Stand. What did I see? Somebody said one here a second ago. I saw that Kiri did. Oh, The Four Agreements, Atlas Shrugged. Is anybody else having issues hearing the audio? Am I not loud enough? Are we having an
Nope.
audio issue?
I think
I can hear you fine.
You sound
Okay.
great from my end.
Okay, Marcy, just let us know if you're still having it. I know Rebecca is there. Um, yeah, Marcy says she's logged back out and in and still cannot hear. There may be a setting somewhere on your computer. When that happens to me, it's because my computer is trying to play sound on another device. Gulag Archipelago. I don't know how to say that word, but I know which book you're talking about. That's a really good book. We started a project called The Liberty Gulag based on that book, where we were going to come out and build a bunch of tiny homes on a piece of land. Sound familiar? We ended up being the holler neighbors and not doing it exactly that way, but it was going to be a creative retreat. Anyway, I have been lax in not introducing my co-host Sean Mills from Hack My Homestead. Sean, how you doing this evening?
I'm awesome. I'm actually drinking some Hollow Rose, so I'm almost like drinking soap. Must have said some bad words earlier or something.
I am drinking from a hollow roast mug, but it's peppermint tea that I grew because if I drink hollow roast now, I won't sleep all night. The Best of Calvin and Hobbes. Hey, that's a good one. The
Hey,
book I
Amy.
said, Amy,
Yeah.
was The Encyclopedia of Country Living by Carla Emery. There is another book by another author, so you want to look for Carla Emery. She's dead now, but her book lives on, and it is one of the best references I've seen for homesteading. So my three things. That's coming out in about 2 months, guys. It's coming out in May, but there's going to be a pre-publishing copy that comes out at my spring workshop. Yeah, the homestead must have one, and it must be a printed one. And half the time when I order one from Amazon, they send me two. That's the thing about the Encyclopedia of Country Living that I've always liked. Somebody wrote the name in the comments. Okay, so I'm going to hand it over to you, Sean, to talk about what else you want to talk about tonight.
Well, yeah. I mean, our presentation today is from Porterhouse, and I met him when he just came as a participant before he actually came down and spoke. And he's got an interesting story. So this guy runs like 3,000 miles a year. He lives in Northern California where there's like no rain, and so he's got to deal with trying to run a homestead. He basically he's like a lot of us where we read about something or we see a YouTube and we dive into it and we start doing that thing, and then we figure out another way of doing something, and you do that 3 or 4 different times and it gives you a really good understanding of how these different processes work together, and then you can kind of almost custom build your system by taking a little bit here and a little bit there. So it's like cooking, right? You learn the technique and you learn what the different ingredients do, and then you can start making your own recipes. And it really ties into what we've been talking about. We're going to be talking about all week. The Self Reliance Festival. We've got this. We've got people that come in from all over the country. They have their own experiences, their own expertise, and they come in, and some of them get up on the stage and share it all. There's no holding back. They get up there and here's how I did this thing. Here's how I built a business. Here's how I built a content creation business. Here's how I didn't let failure stop me. Here's how I built an underground network of people, right? So there's that, and then you're interacting with the different people in the audience, and you're from here, or you used to live there, or you grew up there, oh, and you grow this kind of rabbit, or you have these kinds of goats, and on and on and on it goes. As a matter of fact, Nicole, you were just blessed with some triplets on your farmstead, but where did those goats initially come from?
This is great. It's a total Self Reliance Festival story, too. So, I had already interviewed the owner of the sheep on my podcast in what's known as the lost episode because then ADHD got me. I recorded this interview, I put it aside to play a month later. In my head, I had produced the audio podcast and I didn't. So, I was at Self Reliance Festival and Tactical and I had decided we wanted to get sheep, and he was talking about how he wanted sheep. And the person I interviewed, Dawn Sutton, who's now on the Self Reliance Festival coordination team, was walking by and said, "Did you say sheep?" And they started talking, and they were selling their flock of sheep because they were moving to Tennessee. And so we bought it. And they brought it down here, and she like permanently until she gets sheep again lent me some reference books that have been super helpful and has mentored me through some sheep incidents because we had some bloat that first year. And if we hadn't been at Self Reliance Festival, that wouldn't happen. And like maybe 4 months after that, she said, like, whatever happened to that episode we did? And I'm like, oh yeah, I produced it. I'll give you the link. I go through, it's not there. And then it's not recorded anywhere. I can't find it. And I was like, oh no, we're going to have to do the interview again. And then I was cleaning up some files and I found the lost episode. So then we played the lost episode last year, and it was a great interview just about raising sheep, using them to improve your soil, interestingly enough. And then also she was helping to preserve a heritage breed of St. Croix sheep. So we just had triplets yesterday, and another one might be in labor right now because she looked like she was going into labor, of course, as the sun sets on the coldest night of the week. So we know what I'm doing later, which
Yeah.
is probably not much, actually. If she has them, what I like to do is make sure that they're all nursing, but it's, we don't do a lot of interaction with them.
Yeah. So there's a perfect example of how those little ingredients that kind of get tossed in, or those different people that you meet with different sets of expertise, turn into things like a sheep flock on your homestead and a mentor to help you understand how to deal with different problems, and reference material and ideas on how to make paddocks for them and how often to move them and all those different things. So most of the time when you start with new livestock on your property, you're reading a book or you're watching a YouTube video, and you go out and you get 15 chickens and you bring them home and you realize the only thing that you have to put chickens in is the thing that you took with you to get the chickens. And so now you're trying to throw together, a chicken coop. And then you're finding out there all these different problems that chickens can have that weren't in the book, because the book only told you about the great things. When you can rely on a community, when you can go to places and hear people talk from their expertise, you can make friendships with them or other people that know about the same thing, then it allows you to fast forward, right? So if you don't have to have all those failures. They'll tell you about all of that stuff because you're getting the one-on-one or the one-on-many conversation, instead of someone that wrote a book and they wanted to sell what beautiful little baby sheep look like and how easy it is to milk sheep and make sheep butter and all that stuff, right? And they're not really telling you about the problems that you might run into. So, kind of going back to the conversation that we're going to see from Porterhouse, he's talking about his personal experiences and how they kind of led him through from just dumping everything in a pile and, kind of sometimes using it and finding out that, hey, on Dad's farm, we had great vegetables, to all the different things that he kind of went through to develop the system that he uses now to build backyard soil without a whole lot of work.
All right. You ready to do the video?
Let's do it.
Okay, guys, we're going to start it. And I see in the chat that there's been some choppy audio. I made sure my Dropbox was turned off. If you're still getting choppy audio, just let us know and we'll do our best to figure out why. Here we go.
Hey, thank you guys. It's great to be back out here. And I just kind of want to dovetail on what Nicole had to say, because the way that I see it, there's two reasons that people come to festivals like this. It's one, to learn, and then two, it's to meet people. And Nicole talks a lot about underground networking. And take a look around you. These are the underground network that Nicole speaks of. So don't miss the opportunity this weekend to make connections with people that you can obviously network, and it's going to benefit us all. It just makes us stronger. This topic I titled Backyard Soil Building, but I'm going to focus more specifically on just composting. But I want to preface what I'm saying that I'm not some kind of a soil expert or composting guru. But I have made some observations over the years, and I just wanted to share that with you guys in hopes to maybe inspire you guys to go out and do some composting of your own if you're not already. Composting is one of those subjects that people take a lot of interest in and are very passionate about. There's a lot of different ways and a lot of different methods out there and a lot of different things that we can do to become composters. So from my perspective, there's not necessarily one particular right way to do it, and I'm not necessarily here to advocate for any one specific way for you guys to compost, but I am hoping to encourage you to get out there and do something because I think it does a lot to help build self-reliance into our life. It's a super simple process the way that I look at it because I just look at nature. I look at what nature does. And if I do that, I recognize that compost is going to be made whether or not I do anything or not. All it is it's decomposing organic material exposed to the element of time. The problem we have is that we don't have an unlimited amount of time. We don't have 500 years to make a half inch of soil like nature does. We have to accelerate the process, and in doing so, we run the risk of making some mistakes along the way. The one thing I can assure you is that if you've composted for any length of time, you've made some mistakes, whether or not you realize it or not. But that's okay. Just try to learn from the mistakes that you make and understand that all the mistakes that you make on the front end can easily be corrected with time on the back end. It's just that balancing act. The next thing I'm going to want to say, and this is what I want you guys to kind of take away from my talk today, if you remember nothing else. The way that I see composting, our job is to balance the two competing interests between accelerating that process and patience. And where they intersect, that's the perfect compost. It's not a specific formula, it's not a specific do it this way, it's just a concept because you can apply that to everything. It's all about acceleration, but also patience. Everybody wants to make compost like that. We can make it in 15 days, can't we? We can make it in 18 days. But what's the consequence of that? And where is it going to be properly applied? Where is it going to be properly applied? So that's kind of what I want to talk about with you guys today. I'll talk a little bit more about that, but I also wanted to kind of give you an understanding of what my background is and my journey through composting. I began composting really before I actually knew what it even was. I was probably about that high. And my dad used to say, go feed the compost pile. And what that meant, I didn't know what it meant, but what I knew that meant was to go get a wheelbarrow and a pitchfork and go muck pins. My folks moved us out of the city in like 1970. I was 5 years old at the time. They bought a farm, quickly developed an interest in raising cattle, and quickly grew our herd to somewhere close to 100 head. And they also realized that was a little too much for us to manage, so they backed things off, and we wound up having somewhere in the neighborhood of about 40 to 50 head is what we managed every year from the time I was this high to when I moved out. But we also had horses, and we had chickens, and we had a big old garden and compost. And we'd take this material, it was very nitrogen rich. It was a lot of urine, it was a lot of manure, bedding materials, and we'd take it and stick it out behind the barn. Wouldn't do a damn thing with it. We wouldn't get out there and flip it over with a pitchfork or tractor, wouldn't stick a temperature probe in it, did nothing to it. It just sat there for months and months and months. And I can actually remember standing here today, I can see this image, and it was more than 50 years ago. And I remember opening the back of the barn door and seeing steam rise out of the pile. And that was so striking to me that I went and asked my dad about it, and he didn't have any scientific explanation. He just said, yeah, it's just compost. We're going to take that and we're going to grow vegetables with it. Well, that's what we did every year. We'd load up the pickup truck at least once or twice a year, once in the spring, maybe sometimes in the fall as well, and we'd put it in the garden. Dad had a big in-ground garden that we'd rototill that in. And he grew some of the most amazing vegetables with that compost that we did nothing with for 45 years. And to me, that just was a signal that, hey, this is a system that works, right? It's not very complicated. It's very simple. It's just a matter of applying the correct amount of time to an organic material that's going to naturally want to decompose. Now, of course, that had a lot of nitrogen in it, so it rapidly decomposed. It went through a hot phase, and then it wound up going through its resting phase, as it does when you're hot composting. But again, we did nothing with it. And so that was a system that I decided to try to proliferate on my property. We've been on our property, on our farm, for more than 20 years now. And we've had gardens and livestock and a lot of compost, right? And so that's a system that I knew that worked. And I was brought up in a system of traditional agriculture, traditional horticulture, traditional gardening. But on around 2019 it was, I believe, is when I started developing more of an interest in seeing a lot of the stuff I saw on YouTube, people composting. And I started to go out and try to validate some of the things that I'd seen. So I got into bokashi composting. If you don't know what that is, that's an anaerobic form of composting using a lactobacillus bacteria that's been infused onto a substrate, and you layer that in, and it basically, it's a pre-digest. It's a form of pre-digestion. It's like you're almost fermenting this material, and it makes the composting process easier. I also got into vermicomposting, which is composting with worms. That's something that everyone here can do with very, very little effort. I've got a system at home right now that I don't do anything to, and I get some amazing, amazing worm castings out of that. And I'll briefly touch on that. It's just simply a 5-gallon bucket. You know, again, I got the idea off the internet. It's not like I'm coming up with this, right? But I saw somebody do it, and I said, I'm going to go out and validate that. Because we can watch all the stuff on the internet we want, but unless you actually go out there and put it to the test and see how it's going to work for you, you're never going to know. And that's how you learn. And so that's what I'm trying to encourage you guys to do. But this barrel, or excuse me, this bucket winds up going into my garden beds. It's got holes drilled into the side, holes drilled into the bottom, and then it's got a lid with holes in it that has a vent so flies don't go in there and lay eggs or whatever. And then I just add material now and then. I'll pull some weeds out of my garden, or maybe I'll add a little coffee grounds, or maybe some food scraps. And the worms that I've put into my garden bed go and come as they please. Now, the first year I did this, I thought, oh man, I got ripped off. I got sold a bill of goods. I put these worms in there, and then when it got hot in the summertime, they bailed. They were gone. And I'm checking, and there's nothing in there. Well, in the fall, when it starts to cool off, temperatures get good, they're going to come back in there, and they're going to start enjoying that space and consuming that stuff. And what they leave behind is an amazing product that doesn't even need to be composted any further. You can utilize that stuff right now, just like rabbit manure. It's a compost you can use without any further reduction. So, train of thought there. Where was I going with that? Correct. Thank you. So in 2019, I started doing all these things, and I got into hot composting and trying to replicate what I had seen and seeing how well it would work for me. On about that same time is when I also came across a whole new concept for me. I was introduced to permaculture. And I was introduced by a guy he's kind of an obscure guy. You guys probably have not even heard of him. He's got a podcast. His name's Jack Spirko. Anybody? So yeah, Jack was the guy, unbeknownst to Jack, that actually introduced me to permaculture. And it was very eye-opening, because what it did is it allowed me to visualize what I was doing on my farm already that was tied to permaculture. But more than that, it showed me what I had not been doing. And it really further inspired me to try to be a lot more regenerative and give back to my land. And so that's why I developed a further interest. And I've been creating biochar for the last 2 years. I've been aggressively making biochar in a system that I created, and that's another form of soil amendment that can help you build soil. I also, at the same time I came around to learn of Jack, I came across a guy that's also on YouTube. He's got a great channel. He composts with chickens. He's a permaculture guy. And if you haven't heard of this guy and you haven't checked out his channel, I'm going to suggest that you do, because he's a very sharp guy. He's very well spoken. He does things in a low cost and regenerative way. His name is Sean Dombrowski, and he's got a YouTube channel called Edible Acres. And what I picked up from Sean, I picked up a lot of things from Sean, and I'm not ashamed to say that or afraid to give him acknowledgement for the things that I was able to take from him, okay? But I took away his composting with chickens operation, and I've been doing that for the last 2 years and generating some pretty high-end compost from what I can see as far as how it's producing food for me, okay? And really that's all we can see. When we make compost, that's the thing that needs to be spoken. We have no idea what's in it, right? We're not soil scientists. We don't know from a microbiological level what is in that material. We look at it and we say, oh, it's dark and it's rich and it's fertile. And you know what? It may be all of those things. It very well may be all of those things, but we have no idea. I don't, you don't, okay, unless you're somebody who can analyze it at that level. But we don't really even need to worry about that, again, if we are patient. Where we get into trouble is when we put our foot on the gas and make compost in 18 days, and now what have we made? I'm not saying that that's not a valid system. In fact, I encourage you 100% to go out and to make compost in that way. Look at any of the number of videos that are out there on YouTube, and I actually encourage you to go out and do that. But then the other important step to that is to understand the proper context for that material to be applied. You follow? What I mean by that is that there's compost that I would make in that amount of time that I wouldn't try to do certain things with. Example, I wouldn't use that compost necessarily. Now, I'm not saying that somebody else wouldn't have success at this. I'm not trying to take away from what others do, because this is just my experience and how I make compost. I wouldn't necessarily use that material to make compost tea. I reserve making my compost tea. I reserve that compost. That stuff's a year old or more. And I manage that compost. I make sure it stays in a state that it's ready to be used. But I reserve that because when you're making compost tea, what you're doing is you're replicating the microbiological activity. And if you have no idea what you've created, right, you don't have any idea if the balance of that composition of material is pretty evened out. You know, I wouldn't want to necessarily do that. I'm not saying that someone else couldn't have success at that. I'm just saying from my standpoint, and that's just how I view it. So that's really what I want you guys to take away. It's not to take away from anybody else's experience with composting. It's just that's how I view it. So I think it's important to understand the context. And one of the reasons why I say that is because here's another challenge to you. Take that 18-day compost that you've just made, okay? And let's say it's a hypothetical yard of material. What I want you to do next is cover that material with burlap, keep it nice and wet, keep it in a state where it's nice, where all of that soil life wants to remain and to grow and to flourish, so it's not going to dry out. And then tell me after 6 or 8 months go by how much material you have. I can assure you it's not going to be what you started with. And so just logically, you can deduce that that material still wasn't ready. You know, it was still fairly turbulent. And so in my compost yard, I don't take any compost out in less than 2 months, but I also have compost that's in there currently that is over a year old. And it's used in different contexts. One of the mistakes that I made last year, and I'll tell you about that It was a mistake, but it was one that I had made before. So it wasn't like it was a big surprise to me. But what I wound up doing is I took some of that 2-month-old compost that I had put in a bed where I had some perennials. And I planted some extra tomato plants that I had. Planted those tomatoes. They did amazing. They were taller than me. They were like 7, 8 feet tall. They had a stalk on them the size of my wrists. Yeah, right? You know, right? Yeah, oh yeah, well, no, I had about 6 tomatoes, right? You know, these big, nice, beautiful, indeterminate, tomato plants. And I physically watched bees pollinating the flowers that were set. Nothing. Too nitrogen rich. But see, that's how I run it in my yard. I know that. I know that going in. That material that I put there was about 2 months old, but I wasn't planning on necessarily planting something in it that would affect it, but I wound up throwing those in, and that was the result. And so again, these are the things that you'll only learn by going out and learning your systems, learning your compost, okay?
Hey, Nicole, is that our break?
I
Okay.
think, yes,
So-
I
Mute
think that's
button
our
had
break.
disappeared. I'm sorry. Yeah, so that's our pause.
So this is great stuff. I do have a question for the audience, though. Hopefully, people can jump into the chat here. I want to know how you guys are actually building soil at home.
Well, I made a poll for that, Sean. You want me to show
Yeah, I was
it?
gonna say, I think Nicole's got some options for you to select. She's gonna throw that up on the screen here. While she's doing that, let me show you what I do. Oh, never mind.
Oh, we just lost your volume
That's all right.
completely. Are you there?
So, yeah, can you not hear me?
Yeah, you suddenly just totally went quiet. You're a little
Oh,
quiet right
interesting.
now.
Okay. So, yeah, so here's the survey. How do you build soil at home? I'm interested to know you guys that are in the chat, 1 through 6. So number 1, what plants need food? Number 2, miracle grow or other mined minerals. Option 3 is worm castings from my worm farm. Number 4 is manure, right? Rabbits. Number 5, a balanced cycle of poo, mulch, lasagna gardening, etc. Our number 6, Jack Spirko's bioreactor method, or another advanced technique. And while we're waiting for you guys to answer, I'll show you what I do.
4.5. I like it, Bill. Are those your wormies?
Yes. This is a little worm farm that lives inside. I'll dig around the banana so you guys don't have to see that.
Wow.
No,
I'm
let's
going
see.
to stop the share so you can show that again. I think everybody can see their numbers.
Oh, okay. I got you.
Yeah, do it. Do it, Sean. Show us your worm compost.
Can you get, hold on. They're kind of high. They don't like the sunlight.
Okay, we can't hear you right now again. Are you wearing a headset?
No.
Okay. Yeah.
Uh-oh.
Yeah, so we make soil with worms. They pretty much get fed all the coffee grounds, which they get a lot of hollow roast, and any other any other sort of food that we have in the house that's not animal based, right? So they get any. I mentioned there's a couple bananas in there. They get apples or vegetable, cut off stuff like that, cores of apples. And yeah, they just turn it into great vermicompost. And then we'll take that little guy right there and we'll turn that into a bigger bin. And then we'll end up with a couple bigger bins. And eventually they'll end up in vermicomposting toilets. They're currently in 3 different sets of vermicomposting toilets in Tennessee right now.
Okay. Well, okay, this just in from the audience. Most of them are doing a fairly balanced approach of poo and lasagna gardening and that sort of thing. One person has started the Jack Spirko bioreactor or other advanced item, and then several of them are doing different kinds of composting. So, some people are like 3, 4, 5, and 6.
Nice.
Nobody was willing to add one. Somebody here is doing Korean natural farming, which we are going to be playing with that here this year. Um, and then 5 is closest. So we've got some pretty advanced composters in our network. Somebody just here said food scraps. I give food scraps to my chickens and they make it into compost.
Nice.
That's my favorite system. Yep. Okay. So I actually wanted to tell a success story in the middle of every one of these because the thing about the community that has developed over the years in Tennessee and all over the country has sparked change in a lot of people. Now, you guys just saw Porterhouse talk for about half of his presentation, right? And somebody here is signing up for Jack's class at the end of the week. Great. He came to Self Reliance Festival, I think it was October of 2022. And he showed up like 4 days early. He was like, you know what? I need to go meet people. And he was already a farmer and he'd been getting into permaculture and he listened to Jack Spirko, heard about Self Reliance Festival, came out, and I show up and he's already there. So I get to Self Reliance Festival, just so everybody knows, before anybody because I need to be there to make sure stuff is set up. And so I get there first because somebody has to be there to tell people. And John Willis is like, hey, somebody's already here. Porterhouse walks up. He goes, hey, I'm Porterhouse. What can I help you with? And he was super kind, helped us set everything up. And at the event, he had an epiphany about content creation. He already had a YouTube channel. He and his wife, Porterhouse and Teal, is their YouTube channel if you want to go check it out. They had done some hiking. He was retired from his firefighter job and he was sort of looking at where he's going to go next. And while he was there, he realized the thing I'm not doing right with content creation is consistency. And he drove to Self Reliance Festival. He drove all the way home from Camden, Tennessee to California. And he said, that drive was great because I was processing all the people I'd met, all the things I'd learned in the sessions. And he went home and he decided that he wanted to focus in on the content, show people what he was doing because a lot of people don't realize when you're learning how to do a thing or changing something like his composting that he was doing and you make video content about that, people learn with you. And that's really great. So he went from 1,500 followers to 30,000 followers in about 3 months doing that. And he was doing a combination of YouTube and TikTok. And by March of 2023, he was speaking at Self Reliance Festival as a presenter. So that's how fast that turned around. So anyway, I thought that's one of my favorite stories that we have. I also wanted to just, because today is the day that we go over composting in the webinar series, we've got a whole bunch of grow food sessions, off-grid living, permaculture, the self-reliant kitchen, which is going to be a really super cool segment, beekeeping, homesteading, natural animal care, and plant medicine at Self Reliance Festival. And those are all just the homesteading side of sessions. To that, we layer on preparedness and tangible demonstrations like the Alaskan chainsaw milling is going to happen on site, for example. That's going to be a really fun one. Anyway, those are all happening and you can attend either in person or digitally. I just wanted to remind you that during this webinar series, we have a coupon code. Webinar20 gets you $20 off, and Rebecca can add the links in the show notes. And we'll come back to that later, but I wanted to just sort of pulled out all of these things. We even got the Hand Hewn Farms guys coming to tell us how to cure meat and make the meat that you grow tastes even better than just like searing a steak off or whatever. Okay, you guys ready to go back into this next presentation? The rest of the presentation? I know I am. Are you? Sean's just nodding. He's not talking anymore.
I was going to say yes in the chat.
All right, let's go.
So what I do in this chicken yard is I bring in waste streams. I bring in wood chips, and I've established relationships with local tree crews, local arborists. I actually have a sign up out in front of my house that I stenciled, says wood chip dump. And then I've got my phone number there. And I just received a phone call from the other day of a lady that called me, and she had asked, hey, what's with that sign? And I said, oh, well, if there's wood chips available, I'd like to receive them here, And she says, well, I don't have wood chips, but I have a cabinet shop, and I have like a bunch of material, and we just cut it up and burn it, and all of a sudden, bing, I'm thinking biochar, right? Or I'm thinking something else. Because I get my biochar material from a local waste stream that's in town. It's a bee apiary. They make beehives. And so I get all my material there. I don't buy any shavings. I get all that from there. So this is a little off topic from composting, but again, it all goes back to soil building. It all goes back to being regenerative. It all goes back to utilizing waste streams. And that's what comes into my system is waste streams. And so I don't have a specific formula. As a composter that's scavenging material for this, you don't have a set way of doing it. I use what I can get, and then I judge that pile accordingly. So what I'll do in this yard is I'll build my piles. They will be in a hot phase for probably somewhere in the neighborhood of like 2 weeks. I'll add material to this for 2 weeks. That is not the way you should technically make compost, because that's like baking a cake, pulling it out, and then putting batter on it and putting it back in and pulling it out in 15 minutes and putting more batter on it and that's what I'm doing, but it works for me in my system. So what I do is I run it through this hot phase, and in that hot phase, in this chicken yard, I put things in it that are going to discourage the hens from ripping it apart, because I want it to retain that heat. I want it to retain that mass. So I build this mass, and then once it kind of runs through its hot stage, I like to try to have it hot like 10 days. Commercially, I think produced fertilizer, I mean, I could be wrong on this, but commercially produced fertilizer that's certified like organic, I think is 15 days. They have to have it in the thermophilic range, I believe. I could be wrong. Somebody could correct me on that. But that's what I thought I read one time. And thermophilic range is 130 degrees Fahrenheit to 160. Any hotter and it's a problem. Any colder and you're not going to do what you want it to do as far as killing weed seeds and all of that sort of stuff. But I'll allow it to do that. And then the piles that are a little older in development, that are kind of moving more toward a resting phase, what I'll start to do is I'll put seed into those piles. Every morning I'll sprinkle seed in them, and then I'll bury all that. And then the hens, just due to their natural scratching and searching for food, are going to be further incentivized to do that. And what that's doing for me is it's helping to aerate that pile. I don't know if I mentioned best practice earlier, but let me just mention best practice. That's one of the ways you can expedite really good compost is through best practice. The rule of thumb that I use is the closer I am to best practice, the sooner I can use my compost. The farther away or the more rules kind of that I break in best practice, I need to add a little bit more time. That's all. It's just a matter of time. But best practice to me is the first thing, and this is a rule that I don't really try to break. I don't try to go away from this, is to make sure that I've got good materials coming in. I don't want to bring something in that's tainted with like an herbicide, because that can have a very long-lasting and detrimental effect to the compost that you've created that's now going to have a detrimental effect to the plants that are going to try to grow in that compost. That's like one that takes a long time to recover, so that's like my number one that I'm not real bendy on that one. The other ones I'm pretty bendy on. And the next one would be your ratios. I try to keep my ratios somewhere in the neighborhood of 50-50. I don't really worry too much about the whole 60-40-10, which I'll talk about, but I'll put a wheelbarrow of this, okay, I'll put a wheelbarrow of that. Wheelbarrow of greens, wheelbarrow of browns, right? 50-50. I'm not worried about it that much. My stuff typically runs more high to the manure side of things. I don't worry about that because I'm not in a hurry. And the ratio that is kind of recommended when you're making like a hot compost would be something more akin to like 60-40. So that's 60% carbon, your browns, your wood chips, your leaves, your stuff like that, and 40% nitrogen, which would be your grass clippings and your yard waste and stuff like that. You have to have that nitrogen component to speed up the decomposition process. The 10 comes from no more than 10% of that 40% should be of high nitrogen. So that's your animal manures. But I typically run higher on that. Again, why? Because I know that works. That's what we did back on Dad's farm. That's what works. And I know that it works if you just apply the proper amount of time. I just wanted to give a shout out to my dad, man. Just buried him like 9 days ago. So he was a good dude and lived to be 90 years old and learned a lot. So shout out to Dad. So again, guys, I don't really want to try to advocate for any one specific system or method of composting because there's just absolutely so much out there. There's a world of opportunity for us to take more control of our own food production. And this is a big way that we can do that. That's a very, very big way that we can do that. Let me get back to best practice. So I talked about the ratios, right? So there's the ratios of 60-40-10. The other thing that I'm going to want to do is make sure that it stays pretty aerobically conditioned. We don't want it to be in an anaerobic state, meaning that it's starved of oxygen. If you make it anaerobic, what that does is that accelerates the decomposition process, plus it also increases and helps with the development of healthy microbial life. You're not dealing with stuff that's anaerobic, both of those will compost, it's just the anaerobic stuff's going to happen at a lot slower rate. You could wind up with some bad pathogens and things like that in there that could be harmful, salmonella and different things like that. So you want to have a hot compost that's aerobically conditioned. And then the other thing that I always try to make sure that I keep my compost in a state that's moist. Because if you allow soil to dry out, things die. The soil life dies. Worms aren't going to want to be there. Any of the stuff that we can't see, which is most of what the soil food web contains, is all of that stuff that you need a microscope to see. Okay? That's what's doing all the heavy lifting. It's not us growing the tomato. It's not us doing that. It's the soil food web that's interacting with that plant. And we need to do what we can to encourage it. And again, composting is just one aspect of that. It's just the fertility component. There's other aspects to it. One of the things that I wanted to leave you guys with is, as I said earlier, I'm not an expert, but there's people that are experts. There's very few people that I would look to on the internet that are experts. We're all just trying to figure it out. We have ideas, and we're willing to share those ideas, and I think a lot of those ideas are valid, and you should use them for your own purpose. But if you're actually looking to learn something from somebody who's an expert, somebody I will refer you to is a woman named Dr. Elaine Ingham. She's got YouTube videos out there. If you really want to learn how to build soil, go to somebody who actually knows what they're talking about. Because she's the person that's looking at it under a microscope, and she knows what she's talking about. So most of the people that you might hear talking about this sort of thing on the internet reference people like Dr. Elaine Ingham, because that's where they learned it. They don't know, they're just regurgitating, as am I. But I'm trying to point you in the right direction so that you don't look at what I'm saying as some kind of an authority, because I'm clearly not that. This is just my perspective. Another person I would encourage you to go maybe take a look at, his name is Gabe Brown. And his story to me is very compelling because he came from a background similar to mine in that, our understanding of everything is in traditional agriculture, traditional horticulture, traditional gardening, right? And not really thinking about it from the permaculture standpoint, not thinking about it from the no-till standpoint, not tilling the soil. He did everything with tillage. But his name is Gabe Brown, and he's a farmer up in North Dakota. And he has made that transition, and there's a particular video, and the YouTube channel is called Living Web Farms. They've got a lot of other great content on there if you want to check them out. They've got stuff on biochar and all kinds of cool stuff. So if you're really into that sort of thing and want to learn more about it, that would be a great resource. But his name is Gabe Brown, and that particular presentation that he does, it's very informative, and it talks a lot about how to best build soil. There's things that we do in traditional agriculture that are actually very harmful to soil. It's just the easier way to do it. Nothing that is worth doing is easy, right? And soil building is the same way. Nature takes its sweet time. We don't have infinite time, so we wind up expediting. We wind up doing things chemically to the soil that is very harmful. So the more we can do to do it in a regenerative way and think about what nature is trying to do. Nature's always trying to cover the soil, right? Whether it's dropping leaves or it's putting a weed there, it doesn't like bare soil. So we need to recognize that, because what that does is it protects the soil food web. It's like if somebody ripped the roof off your house, how warm would you be? In the heat of the summer, you'd be boiling. Same with when it's cold, right? You put a roof on that house, you cover the soil with mulch or wood chips or something like that, and things want to naturally be there. And that's what we want to try to encourage. He talks about not disturbing the soil. Soil disturbance causes certain triggers. It'll cause certain weeds to germinate. It'll cause certain things to happen. But more importantly, what it does is it will destroy the aggregation that is necessary for soil to be into these little balls and to be held together and the soil food web to grow and to flourish. There's a lot of things that he talks about in this particular presentation. And like I say, if you're interested in learning a little bit more about building soil and what you can do in your own backyard, there's a tremendous amount of available material out there. If any of you guys are interested in learning more about this or talking with me more about the things that I'm doing on our farm and what I'm doing composting with chickens, or if you're interested in that, certainly reach out to me. I could be either reached at porterhouseandteal@gmail.com or go right directly on our website, which is porterhouseandteal.com. And YouTube channels, Porterhouse and Teal, so you could reach us there as well. Is Nicole around somewhere? Where'd she go? Where'd she go? Anybody seen her? Okay. I'll catch up with her later. Yes, sir.
Porterhouse and Teal.
Oh, you want to know how that name came about?
I want to get it down right.
Oh, yeah. Porterhouse, like the steak. Yeah. And then teal.
Color?
Yeah, teal the color. Yep. Yeah.
I won't know how it came about.
Okay. So my wife and I, we had hopes of hiking the Pacific Crest Trail in its entirety. And back in 2020, we wound up getting our permits. So we had our permits to start in Campo down by Mexico, and we were going to hike all the way up to Canada. COVID came around, and it kind of changed my outlook on that. Not necessarily from COVID, like I'm not wanting to get out around people. It was just that it really I didn't want to intrude on people in their communities. People were so freaked out at that time. We just really didn't want to be the ones coming into town. Hey guys, we're hikers, embrace us. Because when you're on a long distance trail, you're reliant upon the community to give you a hitch into town. you're reliant on the community to put you up at their place, to show you some love with trail magic and all those things. I didn't want to intrude upon that, so what we decided to do instead is we wound up hiking, just section hiking, because it's not that far from our house. It's kind of local in that area. So in 2020, we wound up section hiking about 600 miles. We went from Donner Summit to Ashland, Oregon. And then the last year, not last year, but in 2021, we wound up hiking all the way from Ashland up to Canada. And then last year, we were going to hike the remainder of it, but we wound up getting a puppy. And so it just kind of threw a bugger into everything, and we decided not to do it and everything. But anyhow, the name came about is when you hike on a long distance trail, a lot of times you'll wind up getting a trail name. And we wound up getting a trail name because folks knew that in discussion, we knew we raised beef cattle, and I was always incessantly talking about eating a steak, and and so it just kind of stuck. And then my wife's was, because she was decked out, it got to be color coordinated, right? So our hiking poles were teal, and she had a teal hat and teal shoes, right? So that's where that came about. But anyhow, that's the story behind that. But anyhow, is there any questions as it relates to anything that I had to say today? I'll certainly entertain those now. Yeah.
Sort of like I'm looking for a practical opinion. I have 40 acres of woodlands. There's a lot of remnants of tree tops that were left behind by the logging that was there just before me. It's still mostly wooded, but I've got all these tree tops, got lots of oak leaves. I thought about, I'm not going to try to bring all that to one central location. I thought about having composting heaps, really that are going to have to process a lot of oak leaves and woody material at various convenient locations around it. I think,
you can do that. The thing about it is, with regard to trying to get that sort of material to actually compost, it's going to take a tremendous amount of time. What you will need to do is you would need to add nitrogen to that, because you can take a pile of wood chips, as I said before, and do nothing with it, right? That's 400 to 1 carbon to nitrogen ratio, a pile of wood chips. Not much nitrogen, 1 part to 400. You add some greens to that, that's going to accelerate that. So essentially what you have is you've got a pile of sort of like wood chips. It's just lumber and whatever. You could actually make that into like a hugel mound. So start looking into doing some hugel culture and come up with a way to see about making some beds for yourself in that regard. That might be a more effective use of that, but again, it's going to be site dependent on what you want to do as it relates to that. But that's what I would consider, maybe.
lots of weeds. There's lots of greenery growing in the spring through the summer, so
Yeah.
just from the local area around each pile, adding to that.
Right. Any other questions? Yep.
Here.
Pardon me?
Have you done anything with human manure at all?
Oh, no, I have not. No. I mean, not to say there's anything bad with it. I know that there's people that do it. It's just something that we haven't done. Haven't gone down that road.
Do we have anything from the digital passes, Miss Louise? Digital pass holders, we love you too, right? Let's give them an applause. It's always better to be here in person, but, if you can't be here, you can also kind of be here. Anything from them?
Yeah.
Any other questions from the audience?
Right over here.
Yeah.
That's
Okay,
done-
so the question is, do you turn the compost a lot, or what do you do about that?
No, what I do, my job in the thing is to encourage those hens to do a good deal of the work. We work in tandem, we work as a team, where they go and they rip the piles apart, and then I go and I stack it up. And I actually move it from this location kind of in a more downhill direction, because the compost enters my yard at this location and it exits down there, which is a little lower in elevation. So I just naturally kind of tumble it in that direction. But I don't specifically go out and flip piles every day. I've done that, and I'll tell you what, man, it's a lot of work. And I'm looking at it from the standpoint of, how can I maximize my time and utilize the benefit of these hens to help me do something that they're naturally going to want to do. It's interesting, I've seen some people make comments on my YouTube videos about, oh, you know, that's terrible that you're making these hens work for food. And I mean, what they don't realize is that they're going to do that anyhow. I'm just incentivizing them, and they're getting an actual additional benefit. Because they derive a lot of protein out of those piles. Those piles are loaded with worms. When I turn a pile over that's been sitting there for, you know, a week that they haven't been able to get into, it's just thick with worms. And I don't want them to totally obliterate that, because it's you know, it's a valuable resource, not only for what they do for the compost itself, but it's also a food source for these chickens. I don't know if I mentioned it, but I've established relationships as well. I started talking about the wood chips, but I've established relationships with different entities locally. Like I have a relationship with a food bank. We good? Yes. Okay. I've established a relationship with a food bank. I've got a supermarket, and I've got 2 restaurants where I get food scraps and the wasted produce, and this is all free of charge by simply asking the question and establishing those types of relationships. And what that allows me to do is bring that material into that yard, allow those hens to have first crack at it, which not only helps them nutritionally, gives them more nutritional diversity, but it gives diversity to the piles themselves because of what's able to be decomposed with whatever they don't eat. So it just cuts my feed bill. It's a multifaceted thing that's like benefiting us all, and it's not harmful to the hens, if anybody was going.
Okay, so that was the end of his speech at Self Reliance Festival. He went on to he actually gave me a present right after that. I forgot about
I was
that.
gonna say, yeah, he gave you a
Yeah.
birdhouse, wasn't it?
Yeah, I have this awesome birdhouse that Teal created for me that has like my logo, my Hollow Roast logo, my podcast logo, and I'll have to trot that out tomorrow. I was trying to figure out how I could race out and get it and show everybody, but we'll do that one tomorrow. That's why he was asking where I was. But so that was the presentation from Porterhouse on composting. Sean, what do you got for us? I saw a couple questions we should probably talk about.
Yeah. So that's what I was thinking. Why don't we answer some of the questions? I've got one here from Vicky. She goes, "I'm getting ready to put my compost pile into my chicken run, which is exactly what Porterhouse is talking about. I also do deep litter in the actual coop. So when I clean up the coop, would I also put that in the run with the food scraps and stuff, or is it not good for the chickens to be scratching through that for the food?" I think if you're doing a deep litter, then that probably needs to be treated separately from the compost pile that your chickens are actually going to work. It's going to have a different nitrogen to feed ratio. And the reason why we want those deep litter systems is to kind of capture all of that nutrient and to help keep down on potential pathogens that you might end up having in that area. And so I think reintroducing that in an area that you want to encourage the chickens to scratch through and look for food is probably not the right method. Nicole, what are your thoughts?
There's no reason not to introduce it into the run. It kind of depends on what your run is being used for. So when they're in the coop, they are digging through it and pulling out things. So it may be ready to go sit somewhere for a while. But if what you're doing is more of a victory garden style where you have a run that you mulch in and then you switch it, that's when I would put it there. So the answer is it depends on what your system is. Now, if you're using the mulch as a way to attract worms, then you know you might not want to do that. But I don't worry about the disease of them getting into their poop by putting that out in the run. I personally take my chicken compost and put it out on my swales.
Mm.
Though, and I leave the scraps in the run. But that's just because I'm a weirdo.
Okay, Jason and Kim asked the question, actually a couple questions, but essentially the same. They're beginners. They're looking to get into composting, and they're kind of wanting to know, how to get started. So he talked about turning compost. I want to just quickly talk about that. So what you want your compost pile to become established with a bunch of microflora, right? You want a good mycelial network, which is fungi, and you want a good bacterial network built throughout there. Both of those organisms are going to utilize oxygen to do their work. Okay. So they're going to breathe in oxygen and breathe out CO2 or other things. And so the reason why you're always told to turn your compost is to introduce more oxygen into it. Now, that can actually have a detrimental impact on the mycelial network that's there. And so what you'll end up with is a bacterially strong compost pile, but weak on the fungi side. Because every time you break up that network, they're putting all their work into putting that back together. So I know that's a little nerdy, but I just wanted to talk about the oxygen part, and that's the reason why they say turn compost. You can do other things with oxygen. The reason why I really like the vermicomposting is the worms will dig oxygen holes through the entire area. Okay. You're still going to have the bacteria and you're still going to have the fungi in a worm bin, but you don't have to do anything special. They will actually build out their own oxygen network because they do the same thing. They breathe it in through their skin and then breathe out the CO2. And so that's a big thing to think about when you're trying to figure out what you're going to do for composting. It's we need to make sure we've got oxygen. If you don't, your pile or whatever you're using is going to become inoculated with anaerobic bacteria. And most of the time, when you smell something that's really horrible in a compost pile or in a septic tank or anything like that, that's actually what you're smelling. Is you're smelling the off gases from that anaerobic bacteria. Now, that being said, there are anaerobic composting methods. So if you've ever looked up a methane digester, that's an anaerobic process, and you end up capturing some of the gases. I think for me, the two easy starter, and then I'll see what Nicole thinks about this. I think the two easiest ways to get started with composting, if you don't have chickens, if you have chickens, it's just throw the compost at the chickens and let them do the work. But if you don't have chickens, it's the pile, right, where you're bringing your nitrogen and your carbon or your greens and your browns together, and you're turning that. Okay, you will get compost there. You'll get a thermophilic composting action. The other one, and the one that I do, is the vermicomposting. You're just feeding everything but oils, spicy food, and meat scraps to the worms and letting them do all the work. So, Nicole, what are your thoughts on getting started?
The first question I have is, what's your timeline? Are you looking to do an 18-day compost because you need it this season? In that case, definitely look up how that works and put in some, your ratios of browns and greens and turn it. That's what you're doing to keep that going. It won't be as awesome as a compost that has baked for longer. And I love Jack Spirko's bioreactor method, where it takes him a year to make compost. He puts all the material in one place. He has pipes down the middle to get oxygen in there. He keeps it watered, but he's in Texas where it's really dry. I'm not sure how much we would need to do that in Tennessee. So it does sort of depend where you are. And then he doesn't have to turn anything. And a year later, he gets compost. I really like that method. He also has sort of an offshoot of that he did years ago in like 55-gallon trash bins, where he still puts that pipe down the middle to get the oxygen, which is the issue. The reason I like that method, one, is it's less work, and two, it's the mycorrhizal network is better preserved in the
Right.
year-long method. But if it is March 18th and you want to have compost on May 18th in your garden, then you need to look at some of the other accelerated things. The other thing I will say is it's hard to mess up compost. Like you may need more time for it to work out because something went wrong. If it goes anaerobic, it's not like, it's the end of the world, it went anaerobic. Like you can dry that out, start over, and get that compost going. So don't be afraid to just try to rot some stuff, basically.
Yeah.
That's because if you start, you start. I have some compost bins in my yard where food scraps go on a regular basis. And then at some point I decide we're done, and then I let it go for about a year in those. And we just keep piling it in, and I'll pile in kitchen scraps and wood chips, and I'll just layer that all in. I also have humanure at my place. And the key there is add carbon, and then you don't get the smells. So there's a lot you can do, but getting started, definitely, I would try at least one time the 18-day method because everybody should try that, and you'll learn so much, and it only takes, it's going to take a few weeks of your time. And then definitely look at the bioreactor method that Jack's doing. He has a course for sale for $40 right now that walks you through in detail, or go to the Survival Podcast and just listen to some of those episodes, and he does explain it on some episodes as well.
Yep.
Cool. Do you have a garden? Was that for us to answer?
I think that may have been a response to the other question about the compost. But Nicole, do you have a garden?
I do. And my peas have germinated.
Ooh,
And now
well,
it's 29 degrees
I was
out.
going to say, what are you going to do tonight?
I do something I call seed roulette at this time of year, where I plant things too early, and seeds are cheap. So then I plant them again if this happens. I think the peas being cold hardy will be fine, but we'll see. I will probably go up there tomorrow and put another row of peas exactly where the pea plants are in case those pea plants decide they want to be stunted.
And if
So
they don't, then you can just harvest some baby micro pea greens if you want, throw them on a salad.
yes, exactly,
Pea
exactly.
tendrils.
Pea tendrils, pea shoots. I do that anyway. I don't just do the peas. So, any other questions about growing or anything else, guys? We've got aquaponics knowledge on right now, all sorts of different things.
Yeah, I
If
was going
trees
to
are
say
short
that's my.
enough, I hoe dirt over them. Yeah, that's actually not a
There
bad
you go.
idea.
Yeah,
You didn't
yeah.
really come through the
My,
dirt.
my system is aquaponics this year. So we will have some stuff in the ground, but the vast majority of our stuff is going to be AP this year. And instead of goldfish, we're going to grow out tilapia as well.
Have you in your area ever had a garden in the soil?
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
Okay. I didn't know if you,
Yep.
because so Sean is out in the middle of nowhere with clay and rocks, and I didn't
Yep.
know if he had started dealing with the clay and rock situation.
Yeah, all of my topsoil is at the bottom of the hill that I can see from my house that sits at the top of the hill. But yeah, so we've done the raised bed method here. We've done the victory garden style where the chickens are in an area and then we plant in there the next year. And the first time I did an aquaponic system, I was like, whoa, this is the way to go.
Explosive growth.
Yeah.
Hello. Yeah. How heavily would you mulch your onions and garlic for weeds? Do you want to take that one or do you want me to?
How do you mulch your onions and garlics?
When I plant them, I put 4 to 6 inches of leaf mulch. And I'm talking garlic right now. That's in October. And then this time of year, I put 2 to 3 inches of wood mulch. So very heavily.
Yeah.
I will admit that I suck at onions. And this year I'm going to try to mulch my onions as much as I mulched my garlic. Because what happens is I have always planted them in soil that was not soft. We'll just put that. It wasn't like loamy and well drained. And this time we're doing that so I can actually see if I get better bulbs. So I can answer that from the garlic perspective, but I don't want to
Yeah.
be a poser
So
on the onion side.
solarizing first is a good way to prep. Solarize at the end of fall and mulch, and then plant directly into that the next year. So essentially, what I'm saying is that we're not mulching for weed control. We are killing the weed seeds, and then we're prepping that bed and getting it ready to. We're essentially softening it throughout the winter, so that when we plant our spring onions, they're going into a prepared area.
Yeah, and that's a really great way if you have time to get your garden bed ready is to put that heavy layer of mulch in the fall and then plant into it in the spring and you don't have to turn.
Yeah.
if
By
it
the time
goes
you get
well.
to the end of the season, when the weeds are starting to move in, you solarize it, and then
Yeah.
you mulch it, and then you wait till next year.
Yeah, that works really well. My garlic went in this year in a bed like that I'd done, and I wasn't even using a shovel. I was like shoving them in the ground like
Mm.
that. And this was the first year that bed's been that good. And it was 100% from that and rabbit poop. The other thing, if you're starting gardens this year, is rabbit manure can go straight on the ground and then you can plant.
As well as
So
goat.
source as well as goat and sheep. So source that. Source that if you can. It'll help you have a kickstart. Tell me again who makes the coffee soap. Is that Porterhouse? Yeah, the coffee soap is Porterhouse and Teal. Rebecca, would you mind putting the soap link in? Also, Rebecca is the one who randomly chooses who gets the soap, and I'm sure she puts it in a whole thing. So it's about time to start thinking about that. But we have another freebie for you today. So we started with compost today, and sort of Porterhouse mentions biochar in passing. So we have another video you can watch about how to make biochar from Bruce DeVries. And this is where I tell you it was really hard just to choose 5 videos. And so I snuck extra videos in as free giveaways. And Rebecca has a link to that she can put in the comments, I think. Do you have that link, Rebecca? Yep, she's putting it in right now. So this link will also go out in the follow-up email that has the replay of this and you know, the replay of this and the link for tomorrow night will happen right after we're done here. And as with yesterday, the link will go out in that email and the video is still rendering. So if you click it right away, the video will still be rendering, but within about 45 minutes, the video is ready to watch. We will also include that Bruce DeVries video. Definitely check that out. He is one of the best biochar makers I have made. Somebody reached out to me the other day and said, hey, where would you buy biochar if you're going to buy biochar? And I said, well, I would call Bruce. And then I got a picture about a week later. These are my bags of biochar I just got. So, yeah.
Yeah, so there was a question about harvesting worm castings. It's very easy. They're at the top. So if you've got a worm bin, and for those of you that didn't see before, here's our little mini indoor worm bin. Okay, there's probably 2 pounds of worms in here. And you saw that little burlap that I had on the top. If I take that off, any worms that are near the surface are going to go down because they don't like to be near the light. And so at that point, I can just scoop up about the top inch, which is essentially going to be all castings. Now, if I've been feeding them pretty regularly, you want to feed them towards the top. And so if I'm going to harvest, I will stop feeding them for a while, let them work through that material. And then when I'm ready, I'll take that off. And a couple hours later, I can just again scoop that top inch or so off. That's how you harvest them.
So, what would you do to encourage figs to grow in clay or clay/shale soil?
I have never grown figs, so I have no idea. Put a pot on top of the soil and put the fig in top of that. In that.
So, I have grown figs in clay soil, and I dug a hole and I put gypsum at the bottom of that hole. And then I filled it in with soil that I had made, and then I put the fig tree in it. And this was in Portland, Oregon, and it ended up growing as tall as the 2-story house that I had it planted next to ultimately. Last time I was in Portland, that fig tree was still there.
Wow.
So it went fine. But the other thing I would think is work on that soil a little bit. Build some biochar into it, get some nutrient into it, and some. With clay, what you have is that the nutrients is all there. It's just all stuck together, and it needs to be fluffified or like made loamy. So you want to get carbon into there to fluff it out, and then you're going to have a better experience in anything you grow in that soil. But clay soil is, in my opinion, I'd rather deal with clay soil than sand.
Yeah, so this year what we're going to be doing with a lot of areas that will eventually be planted into is a lot of Korean natural farming methods where we're going to be spraying IMO and lactobacillus just directly right on those areas because Matt Powers has shown where once that soil starts getting inoculated, it just goes to work. It's crazy.
Yeah. So here's a fun thing about this, the lactobacillus thing. They talk about how to make lactobacillus. And I'm like, I make cheese all the time.
Yeah,
I have whey, and nobody in any of these presentations is like, hey, take your whey and spray that on your gardens.
exactly.
But
Yeah.
you can. And I have. I used it to help fight diseases in tomatoes, which doesn't work as well as aspirin, as it turns out, but it helps. And so I've taken to, when I'm not feeding the whey to the animals, just diluting it and drenching the soil with it.
Mhm.
I actually fed some into my aquaponics system the other day too.
Nice.
So it's just more interesting uses of whey. Okay.
Uh,
Yeah.
Don asked, does anyone do compost tea? I don't. I actually have a Vortex brewer. I got the one that Brian Norton built at SRF in fall of 22, I believe it was. And I have run it a few times, but not actually to make compost tea yet.
Yes. Tactical makes compost tea from his worm castings. And I
Nice.
need some just in case he's listening. So I've also never made the only actually I did make compost tea once. I did it with I made comfrey compost tea where you put the comfrey in water and that stuff's amazing and it smells really bad.
Yeah.
But it's amazing for nutrients. Yeah, Bill says I also use whey for blossom end rot. Yeah, Bill, plant aspirin with your tomatoes if you haven't already heard that trick. It really helps with the blight that comes and then blossom end rot. It doesn't eliminate it, but it does help for some reason. It's weird. Blossom end rot is also can be a function of lack of calcium.
Mm.
So that's another thing that could happen. Anyway, all of those things. Looks like we're to the end of questions, and I would be remiss if I didn't remind everybody that we have this thing coming up. What is the thing, Sean?
Yeah, so we've got this little thing called the Self Reliance Festival. It's going to happen on April 6th and 7th in Camden, Tennessee, about an hour west of Nashville. And you guys should all be there. So I took down everyone's name and your IP addresses. No, I'm just kidding. But so you saw that presentation. Some of you guys might have been on yesterday. I hope some of you or all of you will join us tomorrow and through the end of the week with the other webinars, and you'll see the variation of topics that are covered there. And you see here homesteading, preparedness, crisis de-escalation. I'm super excited about Sunny's talk. Building the community. She mentioned there's going to be a sawmill thing there. Growing your small business. If you guys aren't listeners to Nicole's podcast, first of all, you should start Living Free in Tennessee. And we have actually done 2 project accelerators from people that are going to be going into business for themselves. And the first one literally came from the last Self Reliance Festival. So those are the type of things that we're talking about. There's all kinds of knowledge there, and you're going to be able to meet 300 to 400 of the type of people that you want to meet if you're interested in this kind of thing. What you learn from going and listening to the speakers is priceless. But what's even more priceless, I don't know if something can be more priceless, but if something is more priceless, it's the networking. Every time I have gone, and this will be the 7th one, every time I've gone to Self Reliance Festival, I've met new people that I'm in contact with today that are part of my, I wouldn't say like super inner cadre if you're familiar with the Freedom Sales, but like the next level out inner cadre. I'm going to have several of the people that I met at the last one at my house next month help me put in a vermicomposting toilet system. I have got people that we're doing group buys on solar panels where we're getting 315 watt solar panels for $75 a piece. those are the kind of things that come out of this event. So you should be there. If you can't be there, then you need to get a digital pass, because again, you're still going to get the speakers, you're still going to get the Q&A. You'll be able to ask your own questions of people like who are on. I mean, I think there's like 22 different people that are going to be talking. So webinar 20 is the coupon code. And yeah, I hope to see you guys there. Now, is that $20 off, Nicole, the coupon code?
Yeah,
So
it's
again,
$20 off tickets, live or digital.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. You can camp on site. So if you're traveling in from far away, you're probably not traveling in from as far away as Porterhouse did. But if you're traveling in from far away, you can camp on site. There are other camping options in the area. There's hotels in the area. This is not out in the middle of nowhere. It's, there's several decent sized towns in the area that you can get hotels out and just come in. There's Airbnbs in the area. We're right close to the Tennessee River. So if you wanted to come in and do Self Reliance Festival for a couple days and then go on a fishing trip, now's a good time to do that.
Yeah, it's a great time of year. John wants to know, are all the talks going to be digital online? So we will live stream from one of the stages for the event. And then Rebecca is nice enough to also record the other stage and edit those. It takes about a month for all the videos to be edited and uploaded after the event, but you do have access to those afterwards, all of them. So unless a speaker says, I don't want to be recorded because it's top secret what I'm saying. And that has happened exactly 0 times, but you never know. It might happen. I always tell them, like, we are going to do these. We are going to resell them. I also give them a copy to do anything that they want with it. But so far, nobody's been sad about that.
You'll be able to watch live everything that happens on the main stage, and then everything that's happening on the other stage. While you're watching the live, you'll get access to that about a month or so later.
Yeah. A lot of participants who show up in person end up getting digital passes for that reason. Yeah. Are there still tickets available to the classes before Self Reliance Festival? Yes. So we have a pork processing workshop that's Thursday and Friday from Hand Hewn Farms. And that has 6 tickets left right now. So that's at selfreliancefestival.com. And if you click on the workshop link, it'll take you to all the workshops and you can get them there. Or if you go to the tickets page and scroll down, they're there. The Homestead Medical class still has openings. Sunny Puzika's Fight Like a Girl class only has like 2 spots left. Like it's almost done. And then on Monday afterwards, there's a wild edible walk that Carrie Brown is doing. And it's not just a walk. He's actually going to do a presentation with people, a workshop really for 4 hours where he tells you like how to use the plants. And then you will go look at the plants on site again. So those are all available as well at selfreliancefestival.com. But you know what I want to know? I want to know who gets the soap.
Who gets the soap?
Who gets the soap? It's been smelled by Nicole Sauce, just so you know. It's famous now. Rebecca, who's the lucky winner?
Mute me. Okay, hang on. I've been looking at other things. Let me do it again. Nicole, you're not on the
I
list.
won.
I'm sorry.
Yes. I get to pick the soap.
No. Rachel.
Rachel, you won the soap. What you need to do is email me and let me know when you want to pick up the soap, if you're picking it up in April or if you're picking it up in October. And congratulations, Rachel's had a great day because she got access to my pantry webinar too today. Monday's the solar eclipse. Will you see the edibles? Yeah, so where we're located, it may be affected by some dimming, but we're not at ground zero there. So, and the solar eclipse isn't until like what, 2 or 3 in the afternoon?
It's like 1:15, I think, if you go due north from Camden.
Okay. Yeah.
Yeah.
So if you're coming up from Florida, Georgia, Alabama, Mississippi, and you want to see the eclipse, spending the weekend in Camden is a great opportunity for you to learn a bunch of stuff and meet a ton of great people, and then just go up Monday morning. So that's what we're doing. Me and my family, we're driving up Monday morning to go and watch the eclipse.
Did you already get your glasses?
Yep, we do.
Yeah. You need to link up with Kurt and see where he's going to put his telescope with the
I
solar
do. I do.
Sean's like, yes.
Yeah, I'm thinking of where he is. He's probably
Not,
going to go to like that little piece of the bottom of Illinois. I can't
yeah.
remember that Cairo or whatever it is.
Yeah, you
But
never know. As long as he's not at work, man. Okay.
yeah,
So what's up tomorrow? Do you know what's up tomorrow?
tomorrow. Oh my gosh! So
Tomorrow's a big day on the webinar series.
if you guys don't know who CJ Kilmer is, you will after tomorrow. So CJ is or was a professor of history at a college that will not be named down in Florida. And he actually started a podcast called the Dangerous History Podcast. And essentially, he started the podcast as kind of like a creative outlet to be able to talk about things that he wasn't really allowed to talk about while he was teaching history because, the powers that be. And so he's got a really great take on tons of different historical events. And he really dives. I mean, this guy will take on a topic and he'll buy like all of the books about that and read all of them, go to primary sources. It's amazing the way that this guy attacks a subject. And tomorrow, the subject is going to be the rise and fall of empires. And so he's going to be talking about, or specifically the fall of empires, right?
Navigating the fall of
Yeah.
empires, but yes.
And so he's going to be talking about what the collapse of an empire looks like and the fact that it probably doesn't look like what you think. So awesome presentation. Everyone that's here that's hearing, I mean, you can see how excited I am. I'm going to be on there for sure watching it. But you should be here tomorrow night, same bat time, same bat channel. Forward the link to anyone that you know that's like a history buff. I'm telling you, even if they don't care about anything having to do with living free in Tennessee, Self Reliance Festival, or Hack My Homestead, I'm telling you, they will love this. Any history buffs that you guys know, or any people that are like, hey, it kind of feels like maybe the U.S. empire is collapsing. Like, are there any corollaries to that in history? Send the link to all of those people.
Yeah. And the link you want to send them to sign up, it's free. selfreliancefestival.com/webinar, and they can sign up. They'll get on the notification email for the event. I do want to talk about the notification emails too. Okay. So I don't like to email people or add them to an email list without them like knowing they get added to the email list. When you signed up for this, you did end up in my general Self-Reliance Festival email. And between now and the end of the webinar series, if you unsubscribe from that one, you will not get notices from this. At the end of this series, I'm going to ask you if you want to stay on that list so that you don't just get, because we send an email about Self-Reliance Festival every couple weeks all year long, usually about either about the festival or about something we've learned. So that will come separately, but tomorrow there's no way for me not to send you also the notice about Self Reliance Festival that's going out. It's not a long email, but I wanted to give you a heads up on that so you don't get like irritated and then wonder why you're not getting notice of the webinar series links that we keep sending out to you. So anyway, that's the context. Just know that we're not going to leave you on a list and spam the crap out of you because that's not how I work. Okay, guys, so we'll see you tomorrow night at 7 p.m. I'm going to have my co-host is Chuck Peoples from Homestead Medical. He'll be on with me. We're going to do Navigating the Fall of Empires with CJ Kilmer. And there's a pretty, I'm going to foreshadow that there's a second pretty cool video you get access to in that session if you show up and watch it, because as I said, we couldn't just choose 5. So there we go. We will see you tomorrow. Have a great night.